My mother has been in the hospital.
Oh dear.
Uh,
Shlema.
thank you. She fell in her apartment and she's doing much better now. Oh, Paul's here. Oh, that's really good. She's doing better and she's going to be moved to a rehab facility today. So
What's her name?
her Hebrew name is Shloma Leah Bat Rachel. So we all thank you. Wish her a refuah shlema, and we also want to and that the zchut of our learning should be to the zchut of the hostages who are unbelievably still in captivity, and the protection of our soldiers and Am Yisrael and all the innocents, that the war should come to a speedy and conclusive end.
Amen.
So today we're going to continue to talk a little bit about Tumat Ochlin, and then we'll go back to the Sugya in the Gemara. I thought it might be worthwhile to take a few minutes just to look at these psukim a little bit more, just with Rashi, basically. So this is the end of Parshat Shmini, and we have here many of the dinim of Tumah v'Tahara. We don't have to go into all of them. I think I mentioned last time. So in this parsha, we have a lot of different things, a lot of different sources of Tumah, right? And Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe le'emor, Aviel Aaron le'emor alehem. Speak to Bnei Israel and say, this is the animal, Zot ha'chaya asher tochlu mikol ha'behema she'al ha'aretz. And then it gives us a list, right? So in the first part of the list, it's the simanim of behema or a chaya that's tahora, meaning that if you, for among the purposes that we distinguish them is that these are animals that if you shecht properly, you're allowed to eat, but also that they can impart tumah. One of the things I'm giving you some theme of tumah and tahara and dribs and drabs, which is not really the best way to learn this, but just to bear in mind. One of the distinguishing factors about human beings is that we can become tameh and impart tumah while we're still alive. Other than human beings, though, animals only impart tumah if they're dead, which might tell you something conceptually about the concept about tumah, but we won't get into that. So here we have the simanim of kol mafreset parsa, v'shosat shesa prasot, malat gera v'behema otat tilchelu. So this is the idea of the split hoof, and I choose its cud. And then it says animals that don't have both of these simanim, and it lists some. and then Mibsaram lo tochelu ubenidlatam tigal tameim heim lachem. You're not allowed to eat their flesh, and you're not allowed to touch dead their their dead bodies. Let's say nivlatam, they're tamei. It said so. Okay, it said toklu, and then it tells us animals that we can eat that come from the sea. Those are animals that have fins and scales. Anything that doesn't have fins and scales that's in the waters. Mikol sheretz hamayim, mikol nefesh hachaya shebamayim sheket seim lachem. Meaning you're not allowed to eat them. The sheket siyu lachem, ibsaram l'tochei le'ivatam tishaketzu. Anything that doesn't have these simanim, you're not allowed to eat. And then it talks about animals that you have to shun from birds, different kinds of birds. And here, the Torah doesn't give us simanim; it just lists different birds. And then it says here, Kol sheretz ha'of ha'olech al arba sheketzu lachem. Any kind of sheretz, any kind of creepy, crawly thing that flies, that goes on four, that has four legs, is sheketz. Except achad zeh tochlu mikol sheretz ha'of ha'olech al arba. If it has knees above its legs, or it has, not knees,
joints,
yeah, but I mean, I think that's
hinge joints, maybe.
I understand what you're saying, but that's also not, I'm not translating it right. But although I think that's part of it. Anyway, I didn't actually prepare this part in particular. It's just a general thing. The Nater, it has these kinds of legs that they can use to jump. And these are the ones you're allowed to eat. You're allowed to eat arbeh and salam and chargol and chagav. That's four. The kol sheretz ha'of asher lo arba raglayim sheketzu lachem. U'le'eh v'titamu kol hanogea b'nivlotam yitma ad ha'arev. Anybody who touches their dead bodies is tamei until the evening. Anybody who carries their dead bodies washes his clothes and is tamei until the evening. So the way Chazal understand this, when it says if you carry their bodies, it means we just said, the Torah just said a moment ago, if you touch their dead bodies, you're tamei. So what's carrying? Carrying means that the weight of them is on you without you touching them. That you have their weight up on you. Yechabes begadav, you have to wash your clothes. So what it means is that they impart tuma such that your clothing also becomes tamei. So they're an av hatuma. They're an av hatuma. They make you a rishon, and your clothes become also, I think, a rishon. V'chol habehema asher hi mafreset parsa b'shesa inana shosad v'hira inana ba'aleh t'meim heim lachem kohanagea behem yitma. This is true for any animal which has split hoof. Mafreset parsa b'shesa inana shosad. Just a second. This is not the point. Similarly, נושא את נבלתם, יכבס בגדיו וטמא הארץ, טמאים המה לכם. Wait 1 second. Okay, now this a different place. Here.
Isn't there a distinction between what is metame and what you are not allowed to eat?
There is, but not. In other words, there's certain. The thing here that okay, so this parsha here is really talking mainly about tuma and tahara. It's talking about tuma and tahara, and in terms of but we
I understand what's tameh, you can't eat it because you can't touch it, but it could be that there's things which metame, but which don't metame, but you still shouldn't eat it.
Yeah, so the things that you mean things that are not well, okay. The only thing I'm gonna I'm sorry, I'm a little bit fuzzy, but the only thing I want to point out about this part of the parsha, as we're just really skimming through it very quickly, is that the concept of tuman tahara is intertwined with this question of what we're allowed to eat and not allowed to eat, but it's not identical. So animals that are behemot tameot, that the Torah considers to be behemat tameah in its lifetime, well, when it's not dead, those are things you're never allowed to eat, like anything that doesn't have, like a chazir or a gamal or things like that. But they also have specific dinim about tuma and tahara. Hold on a second. Right. Every animal which parts the hoof and is not cloven-footed or chews the cud is unclean to you. Everyone who touches them shall be unclean. You should, but the tuma only comes about if the animal is dead. V'kol holech al kapav v'kol chaya holechet al arba tmeim hem lachem. Kol nogeh b'nivotam yitma ad ha'arev. Hold on a second. Right. Ka'ayim is also another word for leg. Kara is like a leg. Kara can mean like a thigh or a leg, and it generally means a leg, also in later Hebrew. So anything that goes on four that has Ka'ayim, nimal l'raglav. In other words, it has legs above its legs or legs above their feet, is the way they translate it, but that's confusing because most, when we think of legs and feet, it's all one thing. So, but it's referring to these kinds of insects, right, any kind of locust, and they translate salam as katydid or cricket or grasshopper. Those are all, you're allowed to eat them. But sheret sa'of that has four legs, but not kra'ayim, is a sheket. So they translate that as an abomination, which is okay. Anyway, I'm sort of running around. I wanted to get up to here. So these are these ones are tamei, b'sheretz hashoretz, the creeping things that creep on the earth, and they are choled, achbar, tzav, leminehu, which they translate as the weasel, the rat, any kind of great lizard. The gecko, the monitor lizard, the wall lizard, the skink, and the chameleon. So in terms of the identification of those particular animals, we are definitely not getting into that today, and there are different opinions about what they all are. But these are 8 shratzim. These are the Shmona shratzim that says Eila Hatzameim Lachem B'chol Hasharetz. These are the ones that are tamei for you of all of the creeping things. If you touch any of these things when they are dead, then you're tamei until the evening. So they're avota tuma. These are when the Mishnah, the Gemara talks about Shmona Shvatzim, these are the Shmona Shvatzim it's talking about. The Kol Asher, okay, so now we're getting up to the part that's closer to our inyan. Kol Asher Yipol Alav Mehem B'motam. Kol Asher Yipol Alav Mehem B'motam Yitma Mikol Kli Eitz O Beged O Or O Sak Kol Kli Asher Ye'aseh Melacha Bahem B'mayim Yuva V'tamei Ad Ha'erev V'taher. So this gives us a little more information. Anything that falls, Asher Yipol Alav, anything that falls on whatever any of them falls when they are dead, it shall be unclean. Okay, so if they come into contact with something, they're going to be mitamei. And then it tells us that if they come into contact with kelim, whether it's a kli eitz, whether it's a wooden kli, or if it's a piece of clothing, beged, or sak, or skin, or a sack. In other words, if the
sackcloth.
Well, it would include that, yes. Yeah, sack, yeah, you could translate that as sackcloth, but it means it has to, all of these things have to be they have to be clothing. In other words, it's not something that's the way Chazal understand it's beged or osak is a beged that could be made. The beged is made from skin, or it's made from sak. It's made from sackcloth. Cloth by itself is not necessarily mitameh. Kol kli asher yaseh melacha bahem. Any vessel that you can do melacha with. Melacha here is very broad. But mayim yuva, you bring it in, it's brought into water. It's the idea that you put it in a mikvah, v'tamei ad ha'erev, and then it's tamei until the evening, v'taher, and then it becomes tahor. So we have in here a couple of more concepts that if you become tamei from one of these avot tumah that is mentioned, or if your kelim became tamei because of one of these avot tumah, then you go to the mikveh, or you take them into the mikveh during the day, and then when evening comes, you become tahor. So you don't become tahor the moment you go to the mikveh, but at that point you're called a tvul yom. But Chazal called it tvul yom, that you tavled And so you have a kind of an intermediate status between Tumah and Tahara. Now, the Kol Kli Cheres Asher Yipol Mehem El Tocho, any earthenware vessel, Asher Yipol Mehem, that falls in from them, in other words, from these animals that were listed above, that were Avot Tumah, that falls into it, out into its toch. Kol asher b'tocho yitma, v'oto tishboru. Anything that's also in the toch of the kli, in the inside of the kli, becomes tameh, and you break it. You'll break the kli. So the idea is that we're specifically here about a kli cheres. A kli cheres is mitameh mitofo. So if the sheretz falls into the kli, even if it doesn't touch the kli, right? What the emphasis here is that that the sheretz just has to come into the avir of the kli. And note it, and the kli cheres becomes tameh if a sheret, not if a sheretz touches it. Because if the dead sheretz touches it on the outside, it's not tameh. But if the sheretz comes into it, even if it doesn't touch it, it's tameh, and then it makes anything inside of it tameh. And it says v'to tishboru, you break it, meaning that there is no tahara for a kli cheres except by breaking it. And when you break it, yeah, and we touched on this in an earlier shiur, that if the kli cheres becomes broken to the extent that it's no longer functional, then it's tahor. So this is something special about kli cheres. It goes on to say, Mikol ha'ochel asher ye'achel asher yavo alav mayim yitma. So from any food with that asher ye'achel, that can be eaten. So that seems to be repetitive, right? Because if it's ochel, then you would think it's ye'achel. If it's so there are drashot about that are relevant to what we're going to talk about. Asher yavo alav mayim, that water came on it, right? So this is the idea we talked about last week of hechsher ochel, right? So the hechsher meaning that it has to undergo this this step of being made fit, as it were, right? Lahachshir, it's being made fit for tumah, and that happens when it comes into contact with water. V'chol mashkeh asher yishateh, and any drink that can be drunk, the whole kli yitma, they will become tameh in any kli. In other words, if the kli is itself tameh. And a moment ago, we were talking about kli cheres. So we'll say that that's continuing. The kol asher yipol miniv latam alav yitma tanur v'kirai mutat tameh imheim u'tameh mihiu lachem. Right, so it's giving us examples of kli cheres. Tanur and kirayim were types of ovens. Everything upon which part of their carcass falls shall be unclean, because it says mini vatam. So the idea is that even part of their carcass can make something tameh, whether an oven or range for pots, right? A kirayim, let's say range for pots. Chazal talked about these, and there's talked about tanur, kirayim, and a kira, which are all different configurations of kli cheres that would have sides and a top. Like a tanur was the one that's almost a almost like a pyramid. It could have four sides, but they come up to a small top. And the idea of that is that the heat rises, and so the top of the tanur becomes extremely hot. And that was considered to be the hottest. And then there's the kirayim, which is it's more of a rectangle. It has space to put down two pots on top. And the kira, I think, has one space for one pot. In any event, these were all things that were made out of cheres. These are all earthenware things that were made, and they can become tamei. Then it says achmayan uvor mikveh mayim yiyeh tahor. Nevertheless, a spring or a cistern in which water is gathered, mikveh mayim, or mikveh mayim. This is where we get the term mikveh. It's water that's gathered in, shall be clean, but that which touches their carcass shall be unclean. All of these things need perush. We're going to give perush to some of them. If their nevela falls onto any seed that is sown, that shall be sown. How do they say? Any sowing seed which is to be sown, it is clean. It's tahor. In other words, so if a nevela touches a seed, it's tahor, but lamed chet v'chi yutan mayim al zera v'nafal minivlatam alav tamehu lachem. So, but if water had been put on the seed, and then the nevela falls on it, then it becomes tamei. So once again, this idea of the hechsher, it has to have water. But if water is put on the seed, and part of their carcass falls on it, it is unclean to you. Miniv latam, you could say, is part of the carcass, or it's one of the things that we described earlier, one of the animals we described earlier, in its carcass form. Let's look at Rashi back here in Lamed Gimel. Kol kli cheres asher yipol mehem el tocho. Any kli cheres, that any kind of earthenware kli that these unclean animals that are dead fall into it. So Rashi says el tocho, and he says ein kli cheres mitamei ela me'aviro. So the kli cheres only imparts tuma from the air that's inside it, from the space that's inside it. So again, like if the dead sheretz is dangling inside of the kli cheres, anything inside of the kli cheres will become tamei. Kol asher b'tocho yitma, anything inside of it becomes tamei. Hakli chozer u'metamei ma sheba'aviro. So the sheretz is an avatuma. It makes the kli cheres a rishon l'tuma, and then it in turn can make other things a sheni l'tuma. This teaches you that there's no way of making it tahor by putting it in a mikveh. Now, this is a long Rashi. Mikol ha'ochel asher ye'achel asher yavo alav mayim yitma. All food which may be eaten, that's how they translate ha'ochel asher ye'achel. That on which water comes shall be unclean, and all drink that may be drunk in every such vessel shall be unclean. So the simple way of reading this is that it's talking about tumat ochlin and tumat mashkin, that food can become tamei and mashkin, right? Liquids can become tamei. And what kind of food and what kind of liquid? So it's the kind of food that one drinks and the kind of liquid that one, I'm sorry, kind of food that one eats and the kind of liquid that one drinks. The whole kli yitma. So they can become tamei in a kli. So following from the previous pasuk, this would be the scenario. You have a kli cheres and a sheretz got into the avir of the kli cheres. It doesn't even have, once it went in, even if it comes out, the kli is tamei, even if it didn't touch anything inside, but it was under the rim of the kli. Then if there was food in the kli, it became tamei. Or if there was mashke in the kli, it became tamei. Rashi, though, is going to give us, there's another way of learning the second part about mashke. So remember, in the beginning, let's just notice mikol ha'ochel asher ye'achel, asher yavo alav mayim, right? So the food, in order for it to become tamei, has to have this hechsher mayim. But mashke is already a mashke. It's already liquid, right? So then you would think that what the Torah is saying is that anything that itself is a liquid just becomes tamei by virtue of the fact that it's tamei. It doesn't need any other hechsher. Rashi's going to say a little bit differently. So Rashi says as follows: Mikol ha'ochel asher yachel asher yavo alav musav al mikra ha'elyon. So mikol ha'ochel asher ye'achel is referring to the earlier part of the pasuk. That is, the pasuk that the part of the pasuk that immediately precedes this. It says, kol asher b'tocho yitma v'oto tishboru, that you break the kli cheres if you want it to be tahor. But now it says, Mikol ha'ochel asher yachel asher yavo alav mayim yitma. That must be referring back to a time earlier before the kli was broken. So Rashi says, Musav al mikra ha'elyon, kol asher b'tocho yitma. So it's referring back to where it said, kol kli cheres asher yipol mehem b'tocho, kol asher b'tocho yitma. And now it's explaining to us a little bit more about what can become tamei in a kli cheres. Kol asher b'tocho yitma mikol ha'ochel asher yachel asher yavo alav mayim v'hu b'toch kli cheres. Any food that is edible, that water comes into contact with, and it's inside of a kli cheres that's tamei, it will become tamei. This is basic tumat ochlin, right? So, and the Rambam described this, as we saw last week. Lamanu mikan dvarim harbe. So we learn from here many things. Lamadnu she'ein ochel mukshar metukan lekabel tuma ad sheyavo mayim alav pa'am achat. So first we learn the idea of hechsher tuma, that food doesn't become mukshar, it doesn't become prepared or fit to receive tuma, to become tamei, until it comes into contact with water one time. Once it comes into contact with water once, mekabel tuma la'olam, then it will always be mekabel tuma, even if it's wiped off, even if it's dry. So that's one thing we learn, that we learn hechsher tuma. V'hayayin v'hashemin v'chol shenigra mashke, that wine and oil, anything that's called a mashke, machshir zra'im l'tuma kamayim. It will be machshir zra'im, and zra'im here means we taught the Torah a few psukim earlier talked about talked about a little bit later. Kiyutan mayim al zera, right? Right. So here, Zraim here just means food for our purposes. If food comes into contact with any of the mashkim, then it becomes mukshar l'tuma. Shekach yesh lidrosh mikra, because this is how you could darshan the pasuk. In other words, we could read the pasuk in a slightly different way. Okay, thanks. Michael's going to be leaving, I think. Asher Yavel, all right, so how could we understand it? It's Shekach Yeshi Josh Mikra, Asher Yavel Alav. So Shekach Yeshi Josh Mikra, Asher Yavel Alav Mayim, O Kol Mashke, Asher Yishateh, Befol Kli Yitma HaOchel. That anything upon that came into contact with water. It's Rashi is saying the pasuk says as follows: Mikol ha'ochel asher yachel asher yavo alav mayim yitma. So when we get to b'chol mashke asher yishateh, we think that we said the pshuto shel mikra would be that now we're talking about something else that can become tameh. The Rashi is saying you could read the pasuk that it's talking about any food that came into contact with water. V'chol mashke asher yishateh. We came into contact with water or with any liquid that one drinks. But it's still talking about food. That food that comes into contact with any of these mashkim becomes tameh. So this is where we get the idea that there are different, the 7 mashkim which Chazal listed that can be machshir tuma. Both limdu rabotenu mikan she'en vlad hatuma mitamei kelim. Chazal learned out further from this that vlad hatuma is anything less than an av hatuma, right? So you have an av. You have the father of Tuma, and then you have the child of Tuma. That's the Vlad HaTuma. So, Ein Vlad HaTuma Mitamei Kelim, that a Vlad Tuma cannot be Mitamei Kelim, Shekat Shaninu. This is what we learn from Chazal. Yachol Yehu Kol HaKelim Mitami Me'avir Kli Cheres. You might think that any kli could itself become tamei from the avir of the kli cheres. Again, that if you have the sheretz that got into the kli cheres, it made the area inside of the kli cheres tamei, and the Torah says that that'll be mitamei ochel if the ochel was mukshar, but maybe it's also mitamei kelim. Talmud Lamar shebetocho yitma. Mikol ha'ochel. Anything that's inside of it is tamei, and then it goes right into the next pasuk, mikol ha'ochel, that it's mitamei ochel. Ochel mashke mitamei me'avir kli cheres, ve'ein kol ha'kelim mitami me'avir kli cheres. The Torah is telling us that food becomes tamei from the avir of the kli cheres, but not other kelim. Lefisha asheretz av hatuma va'klish nitma mimenu vlad hatuma. So this is what we said earlier. The sheretz is the av hatuma. Va'klish nitma mimenu vlad hatuma. So the kli cheres that it got into is now a vlad hatuma. We would call it a rishon hatuma. Lefikach eino chozer mitamei kelim shebetocho. So a vlad hatuma, a rishon hatuma, doesn't make, it can't be mitamei other kelim, but it can be mitamei ochli. Manu od she'asheretz shenafal avir tanur v'hapat b'tocho v'onaga asheretz b'pat tanur rishon v'hapat shniya v'nomar ro'in et tanur kilu mal yad tuma v'tehei hapat tchila you know what, this actually, I don't know, we'll take a second, we'll try to explain this. So this is another example. So let's say you have a tanur and you're baking bread in the tanur. And then a sheretz gets into the avir of the tanur. So the sheretz is the av hatzuma. The tanur is a rishon, the tuma. The pat is a sheni, the tuma. And we don't say that we look at the avir, right, the air that's inside of the tanur. We don't look at it as if it's full of tuma, and therefore you might say that the pot, that the bread that's baking inside is also a rishon. In other words, why don't I say that that in the same way that the kli cheres became a rishon, anything that's inside of the kli should become a rishon. She'imata omer ken, if you would say that, lo nitma'atu kol hakelim militamei me'avir kli cheres. If that would be true, then it could not be true what we said earlier, that other kelim that would be in the avir klicheres can't become tameh. We said earlier that you can only make ochel tameh in the avir of the klicheres, but not other kelim. Sharei tuma atzma nogat behen mikaban, because the tuma itself is touching them on the outside. There's other kelim that are not other kinds of kelim that would be inside can't become tameh.
So
Yes.
when the archaeologists find villages from the antiquity in Eretz Israel, they know it's a Jewish village because the vessels are of stone. They're stone vessels.
Right. And what's special about stone vessels?
They don't get tuma.
Right, they're not mikablei tuma. So all these issues of kli. Now, presumably they did have some kli cheres, but a lot of those don't survive to archaeological digs. But so I think it was probably still common. I'm not an expert in this, but also just based on Talmudic sources that we know that certain types of kli cheres are still popular in Bayit Sheni, including the tanur and the kirayim. But let's say other kinds of kelim that don't have to be made of cheres, or let's say are not, you could more easily make them out of things that are not mitameh, like the Evan, then that's something that's more that becomes popular because then you don't have to worry about it becoming tameh. Just a second. Yeah, I'm sorry, it's kind of tough stuff and we didn't really prepare, I didn't prepare you to go through this. I do want to read to the end of Rashi though, because it comes back to Tumat Ochlin. We also learn, in other words, Rashi, right, he introduced this comment by saying we learn a lot of things from this pasuk. So he's going through this list, and then he says, we also learn about water coming onto Ochel. Sheina machsheret zra'im, elim ken naflu ehem mishenit l'shu. That zra'im, which we're using as a general term for food, don't become mukshar unless the water fell on them once they were picked, they were removed from the ground. If you say that they become mukshar with water when they're still connected to the ground, you will never have any kind of food that grows from the ground that water didn't come into contact with it. Mahu, right? So Mahu Omer Asher Yavo Alav Mayim. So what does the pasuk mean when it says that water comes upon it? Lamadnu od shein ochel mitamei acherim. We also Mahu Omer Asher Yavo Alav Mayim. So that's a kind of rhetorical question. What else could it mean except that the water came upon it when it was nitlash, when the fruit or whatever was nitlash was already picked. We also learned that ochel, that food, isn't mitamei other things, elin kain yesh bo kabetza, unless it itself is the size of a betza. Shenemar asher yeachel. This is part of the drasha of ochel asher yeachel. How does Rashi understand it? Ochel hane'echal bevat achat. What is it? What does the Torah add by asher yeachel? It's food that can be eaten in one go, in one swallow. The shiaru chachamim, and the chachamim measured, right, or they estimated, ein beta blia machzik yoter michdei beitzat shel tarnegolet, that a human food pipe, your human throat, can't take more at once than the size of a chicken egg. So you see something about the way Rashi says that, and he's quoting Chazal. It's one of the things that we keep dealing with. Keep going back and forth. It goes back to a question that Paul raised a few weeks ago: is what is the basis for shiurim? So what you see is Chazal, by learning these psukim, they understand that, okay, from Shuto Shel Mikra, we get the idea that food can become tameh. And then when we want to know about shiurim, about food that can make other things tameh. So if you eat food that's tameh, you could also, that's what the term that's used there is nifsal hagviyah. Your inside becomes pasul. You're not allowed, and it limits you in terms of where that kind of tumah limits you in terms of where you're allowed to go in the machaneh. So Chazal understood that the Torah doesn't expressly give a shiur, but it implies a shiur when it says ochel asher ye'achel. That ochel asher ye'achel means food that you would be able, as much food as you could eat at once, and that would be a kibetza. Okay, so I hope that some of this sheds some light. I'm a little worried that going through it quickly is maybe difficult, but let's go back to the Gemara here now. So we're in this sugya, the beginning of Daf Pei. Actually, these two words at the end of the previous Daf. 3 words. Tanya, Rabbi Omer. So Rabbi says, Kol hashiurin kulan b'kazayit. All shiurin are a kazayit, and Rashi says, Kol hashiurin ha'amurin ba'oklin. All shiurin regarding ochlin in the Torah are measured as a kazayit. Chutz mitumat ochlin, except for the shiur for food to become tameh or to be mitameh of food, right? Of food in order to be shashi. And how do we know? How do we Chazal? I guess he wouldn't have heard himself as Chazal. How do we the Chachamim No, but this is true. Sheshina hakatzuv b'mashma'an, v'shinu chachamim b'shiuran. Because regarding Tumat Ochlin, the Torah changed the way it's understood. In other words, it changed the implication of the way it's expressed in the Torah. I'm saying a lot here, but we'll flesh it out a little bit more. And because the Torah changed the way it's mashma, that changed the way we understand it, Shinu Chachamim b'shiuran. So that the Chachamim took that as a hint that it has a different shiur. V'rayam davar Yom Kippurim, and the proof for that we get from Yom Kippur. So before we go on, so we read this last week. We went through this somewhat. I want to point out something. There's a kind of an internal problem, maybe even internal contradiction in this Braita, because it says all shiurin are kazayit except for tumat oklin, and because of these reasons, and the proof is Yom Kippurim. So what's the shiur of oklin for Yom Kippur?
It's kosher. You're not allowed to eat anything, but you're not punished unless you eat a kotevet gasa.
Right. So the shiur that's significant for Yom Kippurim is not a kazayit. And Rebbe started off by saying kol hashirun kulan b'kazayit. And then he says, except for, so he should have said, all of the shiurin are kazayit except for tumat ochlin and Yom Kippurim. So that's a little difficult.
Eating on Yom Kippur has nothing to do with Tumah.
No, but also all of the shiurin kulan b'kazayit, as Rashi explains, ha'amurim ba'ochlin. So it's not, right, so the first line, kol ha'shiurin kulan b'kazayit, is just talking about what? It's talking about eating for all other purposes. For all other purposes. So as we've mentioned many times, so we have different purposes for mitzvot and shiurin of ochlin. So we have, on the one hand, things we're not allowed to eat, some of which we just listed from Parshat Shmini, like you're not allowed to eat nevela or treifa. Well, the treifa is elsewhere. Nevela, or you're not allowed to eat shratzim, or you're not allowed to eat animals that didn't have certain simanim. So we have all kinds of isurei achila. We also have mitzvot to eat. So you have to eat matzah, you have to eat korban pesach, right? Those are things that you have to eat. So all of those shiurin, we measure them as a kazayit, except for tumat ochlin. So the shiurim that are relevant for tumat ochlin are not measured as a kazayit. They're not measured as a kazayit, and as we see, as we saw already before last week, and in Rashi today, and in the Rambam last week, that those are measured as a kibetza. Tumat ochlin is a kibetza, and we saw the limud from Rashi. Kol ha'ochel asher ya'achel tells me the size of a betza is what is ochlin that becomes tameh. All right. So all shiurin are measured as a kazayit except for tumat ochlin. And why is it that tumat ochlin is different? Because shina katuv b'mashma'an v'shinu chachamim b'shiuran. V'rayal davar Yom Kippurim. So now the Gemara is going to try to understand this Braita. It says, "My shina katuv b'mashma'o." What does it mean when the mashma'o or mashma'an doesn't really make a difference, but Gemara changes it? Rashi also had mashma'o. So what does Rebbe mean when he says Shina hakatuv b'mashma'o? Mi lo te'uneh. So it's referring to this last part about Yoma Kippurim, that the Torah changed the way it talks about the Isur of Achilah on Yom Kippurim. From instead of saying Lo Tochal, it said Lo Te'uneh. Umay Shinu Chachamim b'Shiurei. So then, what does it mean that Chachamim changed Shiur? Kikotevet. It changed the Shiur from what would have otherwise been a Kazayit to a Kikotevet. So what does it mean that we have a proof for Tumat Ochlin that it has a different shiur than a kazayit? How do we bring a proof from Yom Kippurim to Tumat Ochlin? So we say Di'ime Hatam Hava Amina Orcha Dikrahu. If it was from there, I would say that it's just the way of the pasuk. So what does all of that mean? So what does it say in the pasuk? So hold on a second. So think of the structure of of the Gemara here as talking as follows. We have all ochlim generally, and they're measured b'kazayit. And then we have two exceptions. We have Tumat Ochlin and we have Yom Kippurim. So it says the reason the Tumat Ochlin is accepted, or the reason it's exceptional, is because Shina Katuv b'Mashma'an, and therefore Shinu Chachamim b'Shiuran. And I'm going to bring a proof from Yom Kippurim. So what's the proof from Yom Kippurim? I'm going to bring a proof that because Shina Katuv b'Mashma'o, that Shinu Chachamim b'Shiuro. So the Shinui of Yom Kippurim we've learned many times because the Shinui is Lo Tu'uneh instead of Lo Tuchal. And so Chachamim said it has a different shiur, and that's Kikotevet. And why did they pick Kikotevet? Because it's not me, because that's Miyashev Da'at, and that fits into this idea of Inui. Inui Nefesh, let's say, goes away if you have Yishuv Hadat. So now, Mayra Yaladavar Yom Kippurim. So how is it that, so now, I'm going to interject a question. The question is, let's fill in a couple of questions. When it says Shina Katuv b'Mashma'an about Tumat Ochlin, so where was the Torah? How did the Torah change its language by Tumat Ochlin? What was different about the way Tumat Ochlin is presented in the Torah? So that's the pasuk that we saw a moment ago. That's this pasuk, Mikol ha'ochel asher ye'achel. What makes this pasuk different is because it says asher ye'achel. I would assume that anything that's ochel is something that's eaten. So asher ye'achel is superfluous, or it's extraneous. And since it's extraneous, it must be there to teach me something. So, and you saw how Rashi darshaned it at the end. That's where we get this idea of the shiur of the kibetza. So Rashi's giving us, as it were, a conclusion. But when we first see this pasuk, Mikol ha'ochel asher ye'achel, I don't have a pasuk like this that talks about, that says ochel asher ye'achel. Even earlier in the parsha, right? It said it had isurim of achila mizet tochlu, mizet lo tochlu. It doesn't say ochel asher yeachel. So shina hakatuv, the Torah itself changes the language that's used of ochel in this context of tumat ochlim. Right? This pasuk is clearly talking about tumat ochlim, and it says that what kind of ochel is becomes tameh for the purpose of tumat ochlim. It has to be ochel asher yeachel. So shina hakatuv b'mashma'an, sorry, shina katuv b'mashma'an. It changes what we are going to imply because it's changed the lashon. Second, let's switch back. So once I know that the pasuk changed, in other words, the pasuk of Tumat Ochlin is different, and so that should imply to me that I have to change the shiur. That all of these other shiurim where the Torah says tochel, like let's say eating an avela, you're over, you'll be chayav for eating an avela if you eat a kazayit of an avela. But when it comes to becoming to tumat ochlin, you'll only become tamei, or you'll only impart tuma if you eat a kabetza. So how would I get that? Because the Torah itself said ochel asher yeachel. It implies that it has a different shiur. So now my raya l'davar Yom Kippurim. So then, why exactly do I need to bring a proof from Yom Kippurim? I already have the shin. In other words, if it's basically true that kol hashirun kulan b'kazayit, except for where the Torah went out of its way to change its lashon. So I have a shinui lashon by tumat ochlim. So why am I bringing a proof from Yom Kippurim? Okay, so you don't know. So the Gemara says, "Di'i mehatam." If from there, in other words, if you wanted to learn it out from there, the there here, what's the there? What's the hatam? The hatam is going to be the tumat ochlim. Okay, so again, the structure is going to, I want to try to keep this straight in all of our minds. The structure is like this. We have all ochlin, except for tumat ochlin and Yom Kippurim. So all ochlin we're going to push aside. And right now we're only talking about tumat ochlin and Yom Kippurim, because those are the exceptions to the rule. So what's the raya? My raya l'davar Yom Kippurim. So what does it mean that we bring a raya from Yom Kippurim? Why don't I just bring a raya from Tumat Ochlin itself? So the Gemara says, "Di'i mehatam." If you bring it from there, from Tumat Ochlin, I could say, Orcha dikrahu. It's just the way of the pasuk. What does it mean? It's the way of the pasuk.
It's not something special. It's not superfluous. It's just the way it's written.
It's just, I might not be so medakdek to say that ochel asher yachel is something special. See, the Yom Kippurim is very distinct because it leaves out the word ochel and it substitutes tu'uneh. So that's very clear that, and since Chazal knew that meant you're not allowed to eat, but it uses the lashon of tu'uneh, that obviously implies a different shiur. But ochel asher yeachel, it's not so obvious. And so the limud then is going to go like this. I'll learn out from Yom Kippurim that a shinui lashon of significance will imply a different shiur. So that then when I come to Tumat Ochlim, I'll say that's enough of a shinui lashon that the Torah must be telling me I have a different shiur. This is a kind of a relatively simple way, I think, of understanding the sugya. But let's see how Rashi says it. So Rebbe says all of the shiurim kulan bekazayit, except for Tumat Ochlin. Sheshina katuv b'mashma'an. Rashi says l'kaman mefaresh le. The Gemara is going to explain what it means by shina katuv. V'shinu chachamim b'shiuran v'raya l'davar yom kippurim. So Rashi says raya l'davar l'masha amarti. There's a proof to that which I said. She lefi sheshina katuv b'mashma'an shinu chachamim b'shiuran. I'm going to bring a proof to this idea that I just said in the Braita, that I, Rebbe, just said in the Braita, that when the Torah changes the mashma'ut, that the Chachamim changed the shiur. So for that, yesh ra'yah meyom kippurim, shaf bo shinu Chachamim b'shiuran, mimnei sheshina bo hakatuv b'mashma'o. Because there I see that the Chachamim changed its shiur from a kazayit to a kikotevet, because the Torah changed its implication, changed its mashma'ut. And where does it change? Where did it change the mashma'ut? Asher lo tu'uneh v'lo ktiv asher tochal, asher tochal, asher te'achel. So, and what's the and then the Gemara continues and says my shinu chachamim b'shirei kikotevet. So once it changed the lashon, it changed the shiur. My raya l'davar yom kippurim. So Rashi reads it as follows: my raya lama lo lahavi raya, my uma dahai mehai. Why does it have to bring a raya? Why does the Rebbe have to bring a raya from Yom Kippurim? What is stronger about this than this? Right? Literally, in other words, why am I going to bring the proof from Yom Kippurim? What is stronger about the argument that I should start from Yom Kippurim instead of just starting from Tumat Ochlim itself? The changes I made here with the brackets and so forth, that's based on the way the Bach reads this. It makes it easier to read. My uma dahai mehai. In what way is Yom Kippurim stronger than Tumat Ochli for this question of Shina Katuv? Dema piresh b'Yom Kippurim b'Mishnah. V'hodiyeni yoter shehatam mishum d'shina katuv hu mishalo pirshu hatam. That which is expressed about Yom Kippurim, that which we explain about Yom Kippurim in Mishnah, to teach us more, that I should learn out more from Yom Kippurim, that the reason that the shiur is different at Yom Kippurim is because the pasuk changed its language. Hu mishalo kirshu hatam, because it wasn't mifurash it wasn't mifurash there. Betumana bichazinim. By tuma we also see the shina katuv b'mashma'o, that the pasuk also changed its meaning, its implication, and we also see shinu chachamim b'shiura, that the chachamim changed the shiur of ochlin for tumat ochlin from a kazayit to a kabetza. So di'i mehatam, if I derive it from there, from tumat ochlin, If I learn it from there, if I learn it from the fact that the pasuk changed the lashon for tuma, hava amina ein sham shinui hakatuv. If I would look at the shinui by itself of ochel asher yeyachel, and I see it's different. It doesn't say kol ha'ochel. It says ochel asher yeyachel. I see it's different. But I might have said that's not really a significant difference. Ein sham shinui hakatuv. The orchu lemichtav mikol ha'ochel asher yachel. I would just say that's just the way the Torah writes, because it says when it says ochel asher yachel. Why would I think that's normal? Ki hechi dichtiv gabe mashke asher yishateh, because in the same pasuk, it has the same style. So I'll just say, you know what? This is just how the Torah decided to express here. Ochel asher yachel and mashke asher, right? Mashke asher yishateh. Kamashmalan. So Rebbe tells us that no, that we learn out from Yom Kippurim. The hatam vaday shina katuv b'mashma'o v'shinu chachamim b'shiura, because by Yom Kippurim it's very clear. There you can't argue that the Torah didn't go out of its way to change the lashon of Isur Achila on Yom Kippurim, because it doesn't say ochel, it says tu'uneh, lo tu'uneh. So, and therefore, I'm going to change, that's the basis for the Chachamim to change the shiur. And more me'ata, so then I will conclude from that, et sheshinu b'tuma, when the Torah changed its lashon by tuma, nami mishum ta'ama d'shina hakatuvu. Then I'll apply the principle that I learned from Yom Kippurim to say, here also the Torah is changing, the Torah did change the way it expresses this question of Ochlin by saying Asher Yachel, to Asher Yachel, Shinui Chashivuhu. Now I will consider Asher Yachel to be a significant difference. That's the way Rashi learns the sugya.
Sure.
Yes.
I have a problem. On one side, you have one hand, you talk about ochel, and on the other hand, you talk about abstinence from ochel. That's not the same.
Oh, so wait a second. I thought you were going to ask something else, but
Tell me what to ask.
no. Okay, so here, but the way I think the way I would answer you is this: the way Rebbe phrases his statement, he says kol hashiurin kulan b'kazayit. Of course, this is a very truncated statement, as you know, as we have in Mishnayot and Braitot, and so we're going to add in what Rashi says: kol hashiurin ha'amurin ba'ochli. So the way we understood that to begin with was the Torah talks about ochlin in many different circumstances. So sometimes it's in the circumstance of eating, and sometimes in the circumstance of not eating, right? So sometimes there's a mitzvah to eat, and sometimes there's a mitzvah there's an isur of eating, there's a mitzvah not to eat. So I think we have to take that as a given. In other words, that's the given, that's the axiom that Rebbe begins with. That when the Torah talks about eating generally, it's going, whether it's an isur or whether it's a mitzvah, it's going to be measured b'kazayit. So like we said, kazayit matzah on Pesach, and also a kazayit of chametz on Pesach, right? So a kazayit of chametz is an isur, and a kazayit of matzah is mitzvah. I thought what you might argue, this isn't your question, but the way this sugya comes out, there's a really there's something very delicate here, because so let's think of it like I'm just thinking out loud, right? But let's say so we have this idea that okay, ochlin are measured by kazayit, unless there's a shinui in the katuv, unless there's some difference in the way the Torah expresses itself. So if I look at Yom Kippurim, that's clearly a different expression because it says lo tu'uneh instead of lo tu'chal. So yes, and the question is, so how do you even know, ad kedei kach, how do you even know that it's talking about eating? So
Well,
that
we talked about it. It's not clear from the beginning. There is a whole discussion to prove that that this is about food.
oh,
It's not an זה לא מקבילה
לא מקבילה למה?
באוכל.
So
You have to go through a whole שרשרת to get to it.
Okay. Right, so זה בדיוק, זה לא מובן מאליו שהמשמעות הכתוב לא תעונה מוסב על אוכל. It's not clear. It's not something that you would take for granted that obvious. There's nothing obvious about this. So, like you said, we had a whole sugya that talked about inui, and we had to understand. Okay, and even at that time, as I recall, we said, I think that there's a question that's unanswerable, which is, did Chazal learn out the idea of lo tzu'uneh, that it means ochel, from different rayot, or I tend to think more likely that was a tradition that everybody knew, and then later on Chazal were trying to see if I could elicit that from other psukim. But leaving that aside, we're going to take for granted that one is not allowed to eat on Yom Kippur, and that the Torah expressed that with the term lo tzu'uneh. Right, tzu'uneh. In other words, kosher lo tzu'uneh. Right, if you're not tzu'uneh on Yom Kippurim, then you're chayav karei. Okay, so I understand that Yom Kippurim gives me now a precedent. The way the Gemara wants to understand this is Yom HaKippurim now gives me a precedent that whenever the Torah uses different terminology for Achilah, when it's talking about Achilah, that means that Chachamim now have a basis to say the shiur is different. So the base shiur is kazayit, and I look at Yom Kippurim, and now I'll say Yom Kippurim. The katuv is so different than normal. Then I'm going to say that it has a different shiur, and when I look, and so therefore, then the logic is supposed to be, therefore, when I look at Tumat Ochlin, Kol HaOchel Asher Ye'achel, that's also a shinui katuv. But if I would have started off by looking at Tumat Ochlin, Kol HaOchel Asher Ye'achel, I may not have come to this conclusion that that's such a big difference. So now, the reason I say this is it's a delicate thing is because
is it something like an asmachta to find and to get some kind of crutch to explain why?
So before I address that question directly, what I'm trying to say is this pasuk of Kol HaOchel Asher Yachel, it is problematic because on the one hand, it has this extra phrase of asher ye'achel, and on the other hand, it's still lashon achila.
Mhm.
So all of the other shiurim of ochel, Torah talks about achila, right? Lo tochal chametz, or ve'erev tochlu matzot, just as two examples. There, it's just straightforward achila. Then I get this funny pasuk, Ko ha'ochel asher ye'achel. So it sounds like maybe it's the same, or maybe it's different. And so the logic that the argument that Rebbe wants to make is that I'm going to derive from Yom Kippurim that if there's a shinui lashon, I'll change the shiur. But I might say to Rebbe, but look, lo tuneh is a shinui lashon legamre. It's a complete departure because it doesn't mention ochel at all. And so maybe that's the threshold. Maybe I need something that's completely different in Lashon in order to change the shiur, in which case maybe I shouldn't change the shiur for Ochli, for Tumat Ochli. But I think though that the answer, in other words, and then I'll say like maybe my question is, so maybe I shouldn't change the shiur at all for Tumat Ochli. But I think what you get, and we saw this from Rashi, Rashi's taking from another midrash, that Kol ha'ochel asher yachel that implies the shinui. I have to say it's not just that it's a shinui lashon, it's a shinui lashon that has its own mashma'ut. Now that I see that there's a shinui lashon, that there's a difference in the way it's phrased, that's going to provoke me to try to figure out what I can learn out from it. So I can learn out from it is this idea that Rashi brings up in Chumash, that it's talking about ochel that you can eat bevat achat. Any ochel that can be eaten, meaning any food that you can eat in one go, in one achila. And that itself implies a particular shiur, and that's where we get the shiur of kabetza. So I see that as it's not, the Gemara doesn't say that here, but I think it's part of the underlying understanding of the Gemara, because at the end of this argument, I might still say, okay, I understand, I'll bring a raya from Yom Kippurim for Tumat Ochlim, but maybe I'll say it's not a good raya. It's not a good proof from Yom Kippurim, because the Shinui Lashon is very extreme. So I think if you add in though that, okay, let's say the raya from Yom Kippurim is just this, that Shina Katuv b'mashma'an, so I'll say Asher Yachel, it is telling me something that I haven't seen elsewhere. And so then it's incumbent upon me to try to investigate that further. So then I'll say, Kol ha'ochel asher ye'achel must mean that, or at least I could understand it to mean ochel asher ye'achel bevat achat. And that in itself tells me the difference of shiur. I hope that's more or less clear. What we get out of this part of the Gemara are these things that, in terms of halacha l'maaseh, we get the idea that all shiurim for ochlin are kazayim, except for these two things, for Tumat Ochlin and Yom Kippurim. And we didn't answer the question that I asked in the beginning, which is why didn't Rabbi say Kol shiurim kulan b'kazayim chutz mitumat ochlin v'Yom Kippurim? Because Yom Kippurim is also not a kazayit, and it's brought in as like a secondary thing. So the phrasing here is still a little bit awkward. But the other thing I want to say about the Braita, and this again, it goes back to this very basic question that you asked, Paul, about what's the basis for shiurim. So from here, what's the basis that all shiurim of ochlin are kazayit? It doesn't say. It's just, this is an axiom. All shiurim for ochlin are kazayit, except for these two things, except for tumat ochlin and Yom Kippurim. But I see what Rebbe is implying is that the determination of the shiur for tumat ochlin and the determination for the shiur of Yom Kippurim, eating on Yom Kippurim, that seems to be something that was given over. Both of those things were given over to Chachamim to determine. That midioraita, the Torah, all the Torah is doing is telling me that Yom Kippur, it seems to be going like this. There's some axiom that Ochlin Stam is Kazayit, and I don't know the source for that from here. But I do know that if the Torah deviates from the Lashon of Achila, that it's going to have a different shiur. And that shiur is going to be determined by the Chachamim. So in terms of what's the actual source of shiurim, we see that it's this interplay between the idea that the Torah hints at shiurim, but it doesn't expressly tell me shiurim, at least in the case of Tumat Ochlin and Yom Kippurim. And those are things that that were left up to Chazal to determine. We'll talk.
Couldn't that be how do they say in halacha Moshe Sinai or something?
Well, so that's what I mean. So I wouldn't necessarily use the term halacha Moshe Sinai as such, but we're going to talk about this more as we continue in the sugya. The next part of the sugya is going to be tumat ochlin kebetza minalan. How do I know that tumat ochlin is measured as a kebetza? Amar Rabbi Ava, Amar Rabbi Elazar, the Amakra mikol ha'ochel asher ye'achel. So this is where the Gemara brings this drasha, but it says it in a different way. Ochel haba mechamat ochel. It's, what do I learn from ochel asher ye'achel? It means food that comes because of food. Ve'ezeh, and what is food that comes as a result of food? Zebeitzat tarnagolet. That's a chicken's egg. In other words, it's food that comes out of food. And so the Gemara goes on and says, Migdi, so why didn't I say a kid? Mechusar shchita. That's not a good proof because when it comes out, you can't eat it. It's not food yet. It's missing shchita. It still has to be shech. Ve'ema ben kua. And what I'll say, what about a kid that comes out from its mother after the mother was shechted? Right, so this is all just by way of reading. We're going to look into this next week, right? But the ben pekua is the animal that if the mother is shechted and the mother was pregnant and it had inside of it a gdi, the gdi it doesn't need to be shechted because because at the time of the shchita of the mother was in the mother and it was part of the mother, and so the shchita of the mother also shechted the animal inside, but nonetheless ta'un kriya. But nonetheless, you still have to rip it out of the mother. The ema beitzat bar yuchni, What about, why do I say a Beitzat Tarnagolet? Why didn't I say a Beitzat Bar Yuchni, which was this huge mythical bird? So we say Tafasta Meruba Lo Tafasta, Tafasta Muat Tafasta. So this is an idea that we talked about just a couple of weeks ago. All right, so if you hang on to if you try to grab onto something that's greater, you haven't actually taken hold. But if you take something smaller, then you've taken hold. So then I'll go the other way. Why did I say about the egg of a tiny bird? Dezuter tuva. It's too small. Rabbi Avahu Didei Amar, Mikol Ocha Sheyachel, and this is where we see Rashi. Rashi from Chumash. Ocha Shata Ochlo Bevat Achat. B'shiru Chachamim Ein Beit Abliya Matzik Yoter Mi Beitzat Tarnagol. Okay, so this whole part of the sugya we'll do next week.
I don't think it's appropriate to shechten a cow which is pregnant. I wouldn't do. I don't think that. But it's not the halacha. I would think that you should do such a thing.
Listen, I don't know that much about animal husbandry, but what I can tell you is pregnant cows get slaughtered all the time. And the way I know that is because the cloth that we use is cloth from we call it shlil. It's cloth from fetuses, from fetal calves. The cloth that we use comes from calves that were in their mother's belly at the time that the mother died. So I can just tell you, as a matter of course, places that raise cows for meat regularly slaughter pregnant cows, and they're different. Nowadays there are different economic reasons for that. I don't think that it was so common before very recent times. I don't know the whole history of it. I think it became more common recently, like in the last 50 or 60 years, because I'm not going to talk about, let's say, a moral or ethical issue, but let's say just from an economic issue. If you're a farmer and you own a few cows and one of your cows is pregnant, what's more worthwhile to you? Is it more worthwhile for you to shech the cow while it's pregnant? Or is it more worthwhile for you to wait until the cow gives birth before you shecht it? So probably it's more worthwhile to wait for the cow to give birth, because then you'll get another cow or a bull or whatever. You'll get another whole animal. But nowadays, the economic considerations are very different because we have farming on such a large scale. There's also a market for the fetal calf. There's a market for the fetal calf, and the market.
What is this? I don't understand.
The fetal calf, the ubar.
Oh.
Yeshukam ubar, right? That the fetus.
The fetus. Well, people would like to eat the fetus.
No, so what I understand is that in the United States, and I may be wrong about this, but somebody who's involved in cloth making told me this a long time ago, that the fetus in the United States, you can't actually sell the meat from the fetus. It's not for eating. The market for it is because it's a fetus, because it wasn't born, that it has uses in medical research. And so this is what I was told, that the fetus that comes from a slaughtered cow, the main market for the skin is in Israel for making chaf. And then for the flesh and the blood and all the other parts, those are used for medical research because there's a certain level of I guess, I don't know if the word is correct, but purity. And it's because they haven't actually lived, so they're more pristine. All of those things are more pristine. That's what I was
or you are not accused to have to sacrifice an animal to do your research, which is not today considered to be a bad thing.
I think the whole this gets into a much bigger discussion, but I think much of our modern aversion to these kinds of practices really uh, is based, at least in my own mind, it's based a lot on the sheer volume of animals that are slaughtered. Again, if you think about a traditional farm up until 80 or 100 years ago, people, throughout most of human history, people ate meat, but they didn't necessarily eat meat every day. And like if you slaughtered a cow, that's a lot of meat. It's a huge amount of meat. So by the time you have villages and cities, so then you can have a concept of slaughtering the meat and distributing the meat to different people. And even then it might be too much meat, and that's how you get people who figure out ways of preserving meat. You can smoke the meat, you can salt the meat, there's different ways of preserving meat. But when you get into the mid to late 20th century and you get the rise of factory farming, all of a sudden you have a plethora of meat. You have the possibility of eating meat not just every day, but several times every day. This would have been unthinkable unless you were extremely wealthy or royalty or something like that. But average people didn't eat meat at that kind of rate. So now there's a pushback, which I think is correct. There should be a pushback for all kinds of reasons against this. But this is a real digression. That when the Gemara, we'll see the Mishnah talks about this idea of the ben kuah, that that if you slaughter the mother and the mother was pregnant and it turns out that the animal inside, that the fetus inside is no longer a fetus, but it can come out as a living, breathing animal, it doesn't need shchita. That's a certain, it's dealing with certain conceptual halachic issues. It doesn't necessarily mean people went around and did this, but we'll see how it's relevant to this discussion here. So whether it's a good idea or not a good idea, whether it's a moral thing or not a moral thing, we don't necessarily know or care for the purposes of this discussion. Maybe we should care, but first let's understand what the implication of the halacha is. So we'll do that, God willing, next week. And I don't remember if I told you, because my mind is a little fuzzy, but I will be coming back to Israel, God willing, on February 8th, which is a Thursday. And I'll remind you that I think we're not going to meet actually for 2 weeks. January 31st is the last day that I have to be in this apartment. And I may or may not be able to give a shiur on that day because I might be busy moving out. And then the next week I'll be traveling. So we may not meet for 2 weeks. If we can, I'm going to try to give the shiur on January 31st, but I'll tell you as we get closer to that time. Depends how much I can prepare myself before I leave. It's not a huge amount of stuff to pack up, but it's enough that I have to think about it. Okay. In the meantime, Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.